It started with a small, locked wooden box my late husband had kept in the back of his closet, a box I'd never been allowed to open. Inside, beneath a stack of old birthday cards, was a single sheet of yellow legal paper. In his handwriting, just 3 words that would eventually cost my son and his wife their dream home. They will betray you. I now live in that house, renting rooms to college students, while my son and his wife receive a monthly statement from me labeled education costs, a reminder that some lessons have to be learned the hard way. My name is Elaine, and I am 62 years old. For 32 years, I taught 3rd graders how to read, and for 32 years, my husband Mark was the quiet architect of our family's security, a forensic accountant who balanced our checkbook with a red pen and a ruler. He raised our son Paul with everything a child could want, but somewhere between his private high school and his business degree, Paul learned to see family the way a leveraged buyout firm sees a struggling company. He married Lydia, a woman who treated Instagram likes like currency, and together they gave me a grandson named Brandon, smart and sweet and tragically blind to the kind of people his parents had become. I remember sitting on the floor with Brandon when he was 5, teaching him to sound out the word grandfather in a picture book, and I remember Mark looking over at us with a strange sadness, as if he already knew that something in Paul's heart had irreversibly hardened. Mark got sick so fast that the hospice bed was delivered on a Tuesday, and he was gone by Thursday. The illness moved like a brush fire through his body, and I spent those final 48 hours holding his hand, listening to his breathing grow shallower, memorizing the weight of his fingers. The funeral was a quiet affair, barely 40 people, because Mark had outlived most of his colleagues, and I had always been more comfortable in a classroom than at a cocktail party. Paul and Lydia sat in the front row, Lydia dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, Paul checking his phone every 6 minutes. At the reception, while I was still holding a cold cup of coffee and trying to remember how to breathe, Paul took my elbow and said, "Mom, we need to talk about the house. It's too much for you, all these stairs. We have a plan." That was the moment something inside me shifted, a tiny click like a lock disengaging, and I heard Mark's voice in my memory, from years ago, telling me over dinner that the best auditors never reveal what they know until the right moment. Brandon had just been accepted to a prestigious private university, the kind with a century-old stone gate and a tuition bill that looked like a ZIP code. Paul and Lydia said they had stretched themselves thin renovating their own starter home, and the financial aid package wasn't enough. Their plan was elegant in its cruelty. I would take a reverse mortgage on the house I owned free and clear, the house Mark and I had paid off 12 years early, and use the proceeds to cover Brandon's tuition. In exchange, they would sign a promissory note promising to repay me the full amount with 5% annual interest, and when they built their new home, they would build a ground-floor suite for me, with wide doorways and a walk-in shower so I could live with family. "You raised me, Mom," Paul said, hand on his heart. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." I remember the exact pitch of Lydia's voice when she added, "And of course, we'll put it all in writing. We're not monsters." 2 days later, while Paul and Lydia were still helping me go through Dad's things, which really meant sorting his belongings into a dumpster pile and a consignment pile, Paul pulled the wooden box from the back of Mark's closet. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of dark walnut with a tiny brass lock that had a patina of age, like something that had been handled 1,000 times. Paul shook it, heard nothing rattle, and tossed it into the dumpster bag. Old junk. Probably his coin collection from when he was a kid, worthless. I waited until they left for the evening, then I fished it out and sat at the kitchen table with it cradled in my hands. The wood was warm from the house, and I could smell a faint trace of Mark's aftershave in the grain. Mark had never let me open it, said it held old work files, boring stuff, but I knew where he kept the key. In the inner pocket of his wallet, the wallet I had placed in the top drawer of my nightstand the night he died, because I could not bear to throw away anything that still held his shape. I went to the drawer, retrieved the small brass key, and came back to the kitchen. The lock turned with a soft, well-oiled click. Inside, under a stack of birthday cards Paul had given him as a child, yellowed and softening at the edges, was that single sheet of yellow legal paper. Do not trust them. Save yourself. Mark had been a man who could read a balance sheet the way I could read a struggling 8-year-old. He saw things coming years before they arrived. The note wasn't dated, but the paper was crisp, written with his favorite fountain pen, the nib leaving a tiny dot of excess ink where he had paused, as if he had known those would be among the last words he ever wrote to me. I stared at it for a long time, letting the silence of the kitchen settle around me. Then I folded it into a tiny square and slipped it into the lining of my purse, and I did what Mark had always done when he discovered a fraudulent ledger. I began to prepare. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe you should always read what a dead man leaves behind. The manipulation began the next morning. Paul and Lydia arrived with a folder full of papers and a notary they had hired, a bored-looking woman who smelled like menthol cigarettes and wore a blouse buttoned one notch too low. She set a portable notary stamp on the table and didn't once look me in the eye. They had drafted a reverse mortgage counseling certificate, a loan application from a lender called Senior Equity Solutions, and a promissory note that looked professional but contained a subtle trap. The repayment schedule was tied to completion of construction of the new residence at such address as the borrower and lenders shall jointly determine, a phrase so vague it could be interpreted as never. I read it twice, running my finger under every line the way I used to do with my third graders, and I remembered Mark teaching me about contract law after dinner, using napkin analogies. A promise without a fixed address, he would have said, is not a promise at all. So I put on my best confused old woman act. I squinted at the pages, asked them to repeat the terms 3 times, and finally shook my head. I don't understand all this legal talk. I need Carol to look at it. Carol was our family attorney, a woman in her 60s who had drafted Mark's will and who thought Paul was, in her words, a walking liability. Paul's jaw tightened, the little muscle at the corner flexing. Mom, Carol is expensive and she'll just slow things down. We've got Brandon's deposit deadline. This is a simple family arrangement. I sighed, let my hands tremble, and said, I know, sweetheart. But your father always said, never sign anything without a second pair of eyes. How about this? We'll get it notarized right here, same note, but I want to add one line. I want it to say, this note shall bear simple annual interest of 5%, computed from the date of disbursement, and shall be secured by a confessing judgment and a lien against the future real property at the address to be determined. That way it's more formal, like a real bank loan. Lydia's eyes flicked to Paul. She knew what a confessed judgment was. It's a legal clause that, if I ever had to sue them, skips the lengthy civil trial process and allows a judge to enter judgment almost automatically if the note is in default. But I said it in my softest, most bewildered teacher voice, like I was just repeating something I had heard on a TV legal drama. I even added, it just sounds safer, don't you think? With all the scam artists these days. Paul hesitated, his eyes darting to Lydia, then to the notary, who was scrolling her phone and not listening. The silence stretched, and then Lydia gave a tiny nod. Paul smiled, a tight, plastic smile, and said, sure, Mom, whatever makes you comfortable. He printed a revised note on my home printer, and the notary stamped it with a thunk. I held my hand steady and signed Elaine Margaret Corbin in blue ink, and they signed too. I had just handed them $130,000 in reverse mortgage proceeds, and they had handed me a signed, notarized, legally binding promissory note with a confessed judgment clause. The reverse mortgage closed in 60 days. I had to attend a federally mandated counseling session, which I passed with flying colors because I knew exactly what I was doing. The counselor, a patient woman with reading glasses on a chain, asked me a series of standard questions about my income, my understanding of the loan terms, and whether I felt pressured. I answered each one with the perfect balance of naivete and clarity, saying things like, oh, my son explained it all, he's in finance, he says it's a good way to free up some money for my grandson's education. The counselor made notes and approved the certificate. I never once let her see the flicker of calculation behind my eyes. I took the lump sum payout, and by August, Brandon's tuition was paid in full. Paul and Lydia were ecstatic. They bought a plot of land in a new subdivision, hired an architect, and broke ground on a 4-bedroom, 3.5 bathhouse with a mother-in-law suite on the ground floor. I was told I would be moving in by the following summer. In the meantime, they asked me to sell my own house to have some cash on hand, but I refused, saying I wanted to rent it out through a property manager until the new suite was ready. They did not like that, but they could not force the sale, not yet. Instead, they moved me into a spare bedroom in their rental condo, a cramped place with thin walls and a bathroom I had to share with Brandon when he visited. I was officially under their roof, under their control. That is when my undercover investigation truly began, and I treated it exactly like the classroom reading assessments I used to administer, slowly, methodically, noting every detail that did not fit. The rental condo was a fishbowl. I could hear everything. The walls were so thin that when Paul made phone calls late at night in the kitchen, his voice came through the drywall as clearly as if he were standing in my room. I would lie in bed, perfectly still, and listen to him drop his voice to a hiss when he talked about the second draw and the construction overruns. I learned their financial vocabulary. The hard money lender was pressuring them on the balloon payment. The builder was threatening a stop work order because they were late on the third progress payment. "The HELOC on your mom's house is the only thing keeping us afloat," Lydia said one night, her voice carrying through the heating vent. I wrote notes in a small spiral notebook I kept tucked inside a sanitary pad wrapper in my underwear drawer, because I had read once that was the last place a thief would look. I dated every entry, using the same habit Mark had taught me when he noted audit trails. Lydia's spending was another red flag. The parade of packages became a river. Every day, delivery trucks pulled up with boxes from high-end furniture stores and online boutiques. She bought a $12,000 dining table that arrived in a crate so large the delivery men had to remove the door from its hinges. She bought lighting fixtures from Italy, custom tile, a sub-zero refrigerator that cost more than my first year of teaching salary. She would show me photos on her phone of the house under construction, and she would say, "See, Mom, your suite is going to be the nicest room in the house," but she never once showed me a photo of that suite. The floor plans they displayed on the kitchen counter for me to look at were always the same doctored version, the one with my name in neat block letters over the ground floor bedroom. What I did not know yet was that the real plan, the one they gave the builder, had that room labeled home office. One afternoon, about 6 months into construction, Lydia asked me to watch her laptop while she ran to a nail appointment. She left it open on the kitchen island, her email client visible, and I knew I had maybe 45 minutes. I did not have Mark's forensic training, but I had spent decades managing classroom budgets, PTA fundraisers, and a household that ran on a shoestring. I also knew that Lydia always used the same password for everything, the name of her childhood dog, a fluffy white Maltese called Snowball, which she mentioned constantly. I sat down, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and typed SNOWBALL into the unlock screen. It worked. I opened her downloads folder and found a PDF titled HELOC Senior Equity Additional Disbursement, a home equity line of credit taken against my property, not hers. The reverse mortgage had given me a lump sum, but someone had also opened a line of credit in my name, using the remaining equity, with a draw period that allowed them to extract another $70,000 in chunks. My signature was on the final page, a wavering, thin version that looked almost right, but I had not signed it. I had never signed for a HELOC. The notary stamp on that document belonged to the same menthol-smelling woman from my kitchen table. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, making sure I captured the loan number, the dates, and the forged signature. Then I carefully cleared the recent file history from the downloads folder, closed the browser, and placed the laptop back exactly as it had been. I returned to my chair and picked up the crossword puzzle I always had nearby, and when Lydia came back, she found me puzzling over a 6-letter word for deception. That evening, I practiced my feeble act again. I asked Paul if I could borrow a screwdriver to fix a loose doorknob on my bedroom door, because I didn't want to be a bother. He laughed and said, "Mom, you don't fix things, you hire people." I smiled sweetly and said, "You're right, I'm just so forgetful." But the truth was, I grew up on a farm in Illinois, and I could rebuild a carburetor before I had my driver's license. The next morning, when they were both at the construction site doing a walkthrough with the builder, I went into Paul's home office. The door was locked with a simple push-button knob, the kind you can open with a credit card. I used my old library card, sliding it between the strike plate and the latch, wiggling it with the same patience I used to use when prying a stuck letter tile off a classroom board. The latch slid back in 10 seconds. Inside, the office was a disaster of filing cabinets, unpaid invoices, and statement envelopes marked urgent in red block letters. They had kept their old mortgage documents from the condo, tax returns, and most importantly, the original promissory note I had signed. I found it in a folder labeled Mom Debts, a name that made my stomach churn. I photographed every page, close-ups of every signature and date. Then I found the HELOC loan agreement, the one with my forged signature, and I photographed that too, zooming in so the shaky quality of the forgery was unmistakable. The notary stamp was clearly visible, the number embossed in the paper. I noticed something else. A folder labeled Paul and Lydia Personal Construction Loans, and inside was a draw schedule for a construction loan from a hard money lender with a 22% interest rate, secured by the future house. They were building on borrowed time, and they had used my reverse mortgage money not just for Brandon's tuition, but to cover the down payment on this predatory construction loan. The math was clear. They needed the HELOC draws to finish the house and pay off the high-interest loan, and they needed me to stay quiet and compliant. I also found a shredded document. In the wastebasket next to the desk, a plastic grocery bag sat full of confetti from a cross-cut shredder. Most people toss those without a second thought, but I taught reading recovery for 15 years. I can reassemble broken sentences. I took the bag back to my room, locked the door, and poured the contents onto the white sheet I had spread on the floor. Cross-cut shredder pieces are not strips. They are tiny rectangles, about 1/8 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch, and they have a faint curl to them from the cutting mechanism. Sorting them is like working a puzzle where all the pieces are the same shape. I separated the pieces by color first. White printer paper with black text, off-white letterhead with a watermark, pale pink from a sticky note. Then I sorted by the orientation of the text, looking for fragments of letters that could tell me which way was up. An ascender from a lowercase b or d, a descender from a G or P. I laid them out in rows, using tweezers I had bought at a drugstore, and I began matching the cut edges. The cross-cut pattern means each piece has a unique topography of tiny tiers, and if you have patience and good light, you can fit them together like a jigsaw. I worked for 4 hours, hunched over the floor, my back aching, until I had reconstructed enough of the document to read it. It was a letter Lydia had typed on her personal letterhead, addressed to an assisted living facility called Shady Grove Estates. The letter inquired about long-term residential placement for a senior with mild cognitive decline, income from Social Security, and a reverse mortgage annuity. My name was in the subject line. I pressed the pieces onto clear shipping tape, layer by layer, and sealed them inside a Ziploc bag. That night, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, the reconstructed letter in my hands, and I thought of Mark's note. Do not trust them. Save yourself. I had enough evidence now to prove fraud, forgery, and attempted elder abuse, but I was one woman against a couple who had already shown they were willing to steal 6 figures from a widow. I needed an ally. The next morning, I called Carol from a payphone at the grocery store, using quarters so there would be no record on my phone bill. I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, the way she always did. Then she said, Elaine, Mark and I had a long conversation about 3 months before he died. He suspected Paul was in financial trouble, that he might come after your home. But he could not prove it, and he did not want to falsely accuse his son without evidence. He did one thing, though. He added a codicil to his will, a dead man's switch, that I'm legally bound to activate if certain conditions are met. One of those conditions is the discovery of any unauthorized encumbrance on the property you own jointly. That HELOC is exactly that. She explained that Mark had placed the family home in a revocable living trust with both of us as co-trustees, and upon his death, I became the sole trustee. But the trust had a poison pill embedded in its language. Any attempt to extract equity or take on new debt without the written consent of a designated successor trustee, which was Carol herself, would trigger an automatic, court-supervised forensic audit of all financial transactions involving the property. The audit would extend to any person who benefited from those transactions, like Paul and Lydia. They had forged my signature on a HELOC without my knowledge, which meant they had violated the trust. The codicil gave me, as trustee, the power to claw back any improperly obtained funds and to freeze the property, but I needed a court order to enforce it. Carol said, I can file an emergency petition today, but I need you to get me one more thing. A direct link showing that Paul and Lydia knowingly benefited from the forgery. The payments from the HELOC, where did they go? The answer was in their joint checking account statements. I had seen a deposit from Senior Equity LLC into their account during my first search, but I had not photographed the actual bank statements. I needed hard proof of the wire transfers. That afternoon, while they were at a final walkthrough with the builder, I went back into Paul's office. This time the door was unlocked because Paul had been in a hurry. I moved quickly. The small filing cabinet where they kept their personal financial documents had a dead lock this time, a simple cam lock on the top drawer. I had learned lockpicking years ago from the janitor at my school, a kind man named Mr. Harris, who showed me how to manipulate a pin tumbler lock after a child locked himself in the supply closet. "It's just feel," he said, patience and a light touch. I used a bobby pin bent into a tension wrench and a straightened paperclip as a pick. The lock had 4 pins, standard tolerances, and I raked the back of the pins with a paperclip while applying light torque with the bobby pin. In under 2 minutes, the plug rotated and the drawer slid open. Inside, the joint checking account statements were filed by month. I found the statements covering the period of the HELOC draws, and there it was in black and white. 3 separate wire transfers from Senior Equity Solutions into their account, totaling $70,000, with the memo lines reading construction disbursement. Their signatures were on each transfer request, and the account number matched the HELOC loan number I had photographed from Lydia's laptop. I photographed every page, locked the drawer, and left no trace. I had been in the condo for almost a year now, and the house was nearly finished. Brandon was wrapping up his freshman year, oblivious, and I had become a ghost in their home, a woman who made tea and watched game shows and looked confused when the topic of money came up. They had stopped even pretending to care about my well-being. The cruelty was casual now, baked into every interaction. But I needed a final test, a moment that would destroy any lingering hope that Paul, my son, the baby I had rocked through ear infections and nightmares, might have a shred of humanity left. That moment came on a rainy Tuesday in April. I staged a medical emergency. I had practiced it in the mirror for weeks. The way my eyes would roll upward, the way my right arm would jerk once and then go limp, my body slumping forward off the sofa and onto the floor, my breathing turning to shallow convulsions. I wore a hidden digital audio recorder in my cardigan pocket, a small black device I had bought at an electronics store, paying cash. I had tested it, and it picked up sound clearly. I positioned myself on the living room rug at 4 in the afternoon, 20 minutes before they were due home. When I heard the garage door opener, I let myself collapse, making sure I landed with a thud loud enough to be heard over the television. I heard their footsteps, the door open, and then Lydia's scream. "Oh my God, what's wrong with her?" Paul ran over, but he did not check my pulse. He did not call 911. He looked at Lydia and said, "Where's the note?" The promissory note from the house, the one we signed. Lydia said, "It's in the file cabinet, why?" And Paul said, "If she's dying, they'll freeze everything. We need that note. We need to make sure it's destroyed before someone finds it and realizes we owe her. Get it now." Lydia stepped over my body. I felt the brush of her shoe against my lower back as she crossed the room. She ran to the office. Paul knelt beside me, not to help, but to search my pockets. He found the copy of the promissory note I had deliberately placed in my sweater pocket that morning, the one with my handwritten annotations at the top in red ink that read original, never alter. He took it and walked out of the room. I lay there for another 10 minutes, listening to the whir of the shredder from the office, their muffled voices arguing about how long they should wait before calling someone. Then I slowly came to, fluttering my eyelids, letting out a weak moan. When they returned, their faces instantly transformed into masks of concern. They said I had fainted, that they had been so worried that they almost called an ambulance. I let them call a non-emergency nurse line and pretended to be confused, accepting the glass of water they pressed into my hands. That night, alone in my room, I played back the recording. I heard my son's voice, calm and calculating, deciding to let me die on the floor rather than risk his financial scheme. I cried for a long time, not for the mother I was, but for the boy I had lost. The next morning, I called Carol from the grocery store again and played her the recording over the phone. She was silent for a long, long time, and then she said, her voice very steady, "I'm filing the petition today. The bank has been notified. When they try to access the HELOC again, it'll be flagged." She told me that a federal investigator from the Elder Fraud Task Force had already been briefed, and a compliance officer at First Midwest Bank was standing by, waiting for my signal. The plan was simple. We would bait them into bringing me to the bank to sign a new draw request, and the bank would be ready. The confrontation happened 3 days later, a local branch of First Midwest Bank. Paul and Lydia had received a call from the bank's fraud department, which was actually a compliance officer named MS. Reeves working with Carol, asking them to come in to verify account information regarding the HELOC. The pretext was that the system had flagged the account for potential elder fraud, a standard review that required the borrower's signature in person. They did not tell me any of this. They just said we were going to run errands and dress nicely. In the car, Paul handed me a pen and a document, a standard HELOC draw request for another $25,000, this time to pay off a balloon payment on their construction loan that was coming due in 4 days. "Just sign right here, Mom," same as before, he said, his voice gentle and warm. Lydia smiled tightly from the back seat, her knuckles white around her purse. I held the document and looked out the window at the passing streets, and I said nothing. The bank's small conference room had wood paneling and a table with a water pitcher and 4 chairs. A woman in a navy suit, MS. Reeves, sat across from us, her posture crisp and professional. Beside her was a man in a gray suit who did not introduce himself, but I later learned he was from the county prosecutor's office. MS. Reeves looked at me and said, "Mrs. Corbin, can you confirm your signature on this HELOC agreement from last year?" She slid a copy across the table. I looked at it, the wobbly forgery, and I could see the slight hesitation in the curve of the E in a lane, the way the loop of the C was not quite closed. I lifted my eyes, and in my teaching voice, the one I used when a child thought they could fool me on a spelling test, I said, "No, that is not my signature. I have never signed for a home equity line of credit." Paul's face went white, the color draining so fast it was like watching milk spill. Lydia started talking fast, her voice high and brittle, something about me being confused, about my age, about the early stages of dementia. MS. Reeves pressed a button on the underside of the table, and the door opened. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in, followed by Carol, holding a thick file with tabs marking the evidence. The compliance officer had been working with the county elder fraud task force for 2 weeks, and the recording I had provided, along with the forged documents and the bank statements, had been enough to secure warrants. The officers read Paul and Lydia their rights for forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. As they were being handcuffed, Paul looked at me, his eyes wet, and said, "You can't do this. I'm your son." And I said very quietly I taught 3rd graders to read. "I'm not signing away my life." The aftermath was slow and methodical, the way justice often is. The forensic audit triggered by Mark's Trust codicil uncovered that Paul and Lydia had not only forged my name on the HELOC, but had also attempted to alter the original reverse mortgage documents to funnel future annuity payments into a joint account they controlled. The promissory note I had them sign, the one with the confessed judgment clause, was upheld in civil court. The judge calculated the principal of $130,000, plus the 5% annual interest accrued over the 18 months since disbursement, plus additional damages for the forgery and the attempted fraud, arriving at a judgment of $220,000. Paul and Lydia could not pay it. They were drowning in debt, their construction loan in default, the new house already in pre-foreclosure. So I filed a lien on that house, the one I was supposed to have a suite in, and when the builder's lien and the hard money lender got sorted out, my judgment lien took priority over their unsecured debts. The bank foreclosed, and I bought the house at the sheriff's sale using a credit bid from my judgment, a legal maneuver Carol helped me negotiate. The closing documents were signed in blue ink, my own steady signature, in the same conference room where I had watched my son be handcuffed. The new house was beautiful, 4 bedrooms, open-plan kitchen with a farmhouse sink I had always wanted, and a ground-floor primary suite with wide doorways and a walk-in shower, exactly the suite they had promised me. I moved in on a crisp autumn day, and I walked through the empty rooms, listening to the echo of my footsteps. Then I did something I had not done in a decade. I called the university where Brandon was a junior, the one I had funded, and I spoke to the housing office. I told them I was a retired teacher with a large home near campus, and I wanted to rent rooms to responsible students, male or female, at a below-market rate. They helped me screen applicants, and by the spring semester, I had 3 roommates. Priya, a nursing student who wanted to be a pediatric surgeon, and who cooked the most incredible lentil curry I have ever tasted. James, a physics major who built a trebuchet in the backyard for a class project and accidentally launched a pumpkin into the neighbor's birdbath. And Lena, a music education major who practiced her cello in the upstairs hallway at odd hours, and whose playing sounded like a conversation between grief and hope. They pay me rent, which covers the taxes and upkeep, and we share meals on Sundays. I correct their essays with a red pen, just like Mark, and sometimes I tell them stories about my students, about the ones who struggled and the ones who bloomed. Brandon visits now, too. After the trial, he called me, his voice shaking, and said, "Grandma, I didn't know. I didn't know what they were doing." We have been rebuilding our relationship slowly, over coffee and board games and long walks around the campus, where I can still see a trace of the little boy I once taught to read. Paul and Lydia served 18 months in a state correctional facility for the forgery charges. The elder abuse charges pled down in exchange for full restitution. They were released to a halfway house, their credit destroyed, their names on a public record of financial offenders. They work jobs now that do not require background checks, and they live in a 1-bedroom apartment 2 towns over where the walls are thin and the water heater breaks once a month. Every month, on the 1st, I mail them a statement. It shows the remaining balance of the judgment, the monthly interest accrued at 5%, a small deduction for the wages being garnished from their paychecks, and a line item at the top, printed in bold, 12-point Times New Roman font. The font Mark always insisted was most easily read by scanners. The line reads education costs. The balance still sits above $190,000, growing slowly, and the interest adds roughly $790 each month. The statement is an invoice for the lesson they taught me and the lesson they learned. I will mail it until the day I die, and then Carol will continue mailing it on my behalf, because I have added a codicil to my own trust with a poison pill of its own. My son is a stranger now, and I have made my peace with that. Mark's warning sits in that wooden box on my dresser, next to the notarized promissory note and the Ziploc bag with the reconstructed letter. He knew, years before I did, that blood does not guarantee loyalty, but it does not need to. The only people who live in my home are the ones who pay their rent and treat me with respect. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. We tell true stories of family betrayal and justice, and we would love to have you in our community. I will see you in the next one.